I'm Eugene Hernandez. I'm the director of the festival, and I just want to thank, well, first of all, I want to thank the audience who are here watching us as we're recording and hosting this more private-facing industry conversation that we'll be able to share more widely at the end of the festival. But we wanted to give you, our industry, our registered industry, an opportunity to engage with some of the folks who've been part of the festival from the industry side or on the journalistic side and the broader film community side, with a conversation about, a conversation that's kind of looking forward. So I'll tell you more about that in a minute, and I'll introduce our panelists, but I just want to say a thank you by way of introducing Marie Zuckerman, who has been such a champion and fan and supporter and active audience member and industry member with this festival in her previous role at HBO and now at Topic. And when she came to us earlier this year and said she wanted to be supportive, we were so thrilled, and we're so happy that you're supporting, you and Topic and everyone in the Topic family are supporting our industry work this year. So let me just let Maria say a few words, and then I'll introduce our panelists too.
Thank you so much, Eugene. I'm so thrilled to have the honor of saying a few words at the final event of the series and for Topic Studios' first year as a sponsor at the festival and the industry talks. As Eugene said, I joined Topic Studios about 1.5 years ago after almost 20 years at HBO, which has presented the festival talks for about that same time. So this is great synchronicity. And I knew firsthand how fabulous these conversations are and what an amazing partner the New York Film Festival is. To so many of us, the New York Film Festival is the platonic ideal of urbane cinephile glamour. Nothing signals the start of the season like a crisp fall evening spent in Alice Tully Hall or a stolen afternoon in Walter Reed watching a sneak peek of the next Oscar contender. While this year we don't have that pleasure, we have some new pleasures in seeing a curated film like the new Steve McQueen or Nomadland or I Carry You With Me in the comfort of our living rooms. Hats off to the amazing festival team for pulling off that feat of going virtual without missing a beat. When I heard that Eugene was taking the reins at New York Film Festival, my first thought was, how can Topic Studios support this new chapter? As a friend of Eugene since his IndieWire days, I know his commitment to diversity, storytelling, and accessibility to art, which might otherwise feel rarefied, but is of course for all to experience and enjoy. Topic Studios is also committed to sharing exciting new voices and stories in film, as well as other formats like TV and podcasting. And in this monumental moment in our industry, as well as the world, we at Topic Studios are proud to be a haven for creators and ideas and to make sure the world hears what they have to say. We could not be, more excited to support Film at Lincoln Center. And as an admirer of all the journalists and the panelists here today, I can't wait to hear the discussion. With that, back to you, Eugene. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you again very much. Thank you to everyone at Topic, and thank you for your support and friendship over a long time. I wasn't going to put a date on it because I don't want to date anybody, but you know, it's okay. Thank you. Thank you again. And thank you for empowering this conversation and so many conversations at the New York Film Festival for many, many, many years and at multiple companies. So thank you. Well, why not just introduce yourself? Tell us where you're logging on from. I'm going to start with Eric Kohn because he's logging on from, it appears to be the lobby of the Walter Reed Theater, a place I haven't actually been in a few months. But anyway, tell us where you are, where you're logging on from, and tell us about something you're thinking about this fall as we head into a conversation about the future.
Sure. I wish I could say that I was still hanging out in the lobby of the Walter Reed Theater, but that's just the magic of Zoom and wishful thinking. But I'm actually in Long Island City, where I've been for most of the last few months, and I have to say I've also been enjoying New York Film Festival. I've gone to a couple of drive-ins, went to opening night Lovers Rock, even though I'd already seen the film because I wanted to experience it on the big screen. And then again, going to the other night, I saw American Utopia, another film that I'd actually had the chance to see a couple of weeks ago, but seeing it with this crowd and the way that the audience kind of interacted with the horns and so forth was really unique and a great communal experience. So introduction wise, I'm Eric Kohn. I'm the executive editor and chief critic at IndieWire. And I've been in a really fascinating kind of mode the last few months, because on the one hand, certainly there have been some severe challenges to the film industry, but as somebody who is usually in the habit of watching, you know, dozens of movies throughout each kind of period of the year that there's sort of a peak introduction of new films to the market. It's been pretty consistent in terms of volume. So, you know, I don't know what next year is going to look like on that front quite yet, but I will say that in terms of some of the key aspects of my job, criticism, curation, tracking changes to the industry, it's been an incredibly exciting time, because a lot of what we've been seeing is sort of accelerated changes that are happening anyway. And the thing that I think that is, you know, most promising about what's happening in around the corner is that we're only seeing, I think, more pressure to innovate in terms of getting art out in the world. And a lot of the films that you know, Eugene, programmed at New York Film Festival this year in particular are not easy sells, and you know, even in normal 2019 circumstances would be really hard to get out in the world. So to a large extent, I think that whatever is around the corner and how it changes the way that some of the other people on this panel do their jobs from a distribution standpoint, whatever that means, I do think that it is going to allow for more opportunities for experimentation. And it seems like that could only stand to benefit some of the films that are harder to get out there than the big studio giants.
It's a good topic, and it's a good part of the conversation, Eric. You know, I'm glad I don't have to think about the films in the context of whether they'll be easy to sell or not. But certainly Ariana and Richard do. Ariana, if you don't mind, just a few thoughts in introducing yourself to our audience, who probably already know you, but we'll pick up on some of these topics as well that Eric's referring to as well in a minute.
Thank you, Eugene, and thank you for inviting me to be a part of this. And we're always thrilled to work with you and the New York Film Festival. I am Ariana Bacco, Executive Vice President of Acquisitions and Production at IFC Films. I was actually speaking to somebody this week and realized that yesterday was my 14th anniversary, the day of my 14th anniversary at IFC Films. So I have seen a lot of changes in that period of time, being in New York in the indie distribution world. And I think that while this last 7 months, 8 months has been really devastating for our industry, there has been a lot of positive, I think changes and acceleration of changes that were already in the works. And I think that in trying to look forward, we at IFC have really been focusing a lot on what those changes mean. And I think having been in a day and date space, in a space that has really promoted progression and flexibility in distribution models, I really kind of welcome this discussion and the ability to throw out the rule book a little bit in terms of looking at the future. You know, we have been one of the few distributors that have been releasing movies for the last 7-8 months. I don't even know how many months we've been in this. It feels like 10 years, but we've learned a lot through this period, and I think we'll take these changes with us moving forward. And I do think that despite the tragedies and the losses, that there is going to be some positives that come out of this.
Thank you, Ariana. We're going to pick up on some of those threads that you've also just laid down for us. Richard, welcome. And you're on mute.
Wanted to keep my my computer from beeping. It's very timely to be joining the NYFF at this point. It marks actually 1 year that we were at the New York Film Festival last year with, I think, 5 films in the festival, and announced in connection with the festival the launch of our new VOD platform, which we felt at the time Kino Now was going to be a nice supplement to our theatrical business and would be a flow through for the titles we were putting out theatrically. At the festival last year, we were proud to present Bacurau and Martin Eden. As it turned out, Bacurau was the first film that we released physically that became casualty of the pandemic. We had to curtail its physical release and pivot to a virtual cinema model around a new platform that we built on top of Kino now called Kino Marquee. Fast forward a year later, big film for us was going to be Martin Eden that we had planned to release physically maybe 8 or 9 months ago. It's now finally going to be released next week, purely in virtual cinemas. So the experience we had at the New York Film Festival has been kind of drawing a circle around the history of our releasing patterns as a distributor in the virtual world. What we saw a year ago, we were all aware of some paradigm shifts in the industry, drift toward digital, VOD. What the pandemic did is turn that shift into a paradigm shove. And we were all forced into a new role of, creative invention and survival mode in some cases. I think there'll be some very positive things that come out of this. It's been a very trying time. We've been doing our best to support independent art house theaters and festivals, and we're working closely in every way we can, even as we still release films physically where possible. But when you're in the art house film business, not to be able to release in New York and California means you're basically out of business in terms of the physical world. Drive-ins notwithstanding. I know Eric Kohn bought a car so he could go to drive-ins for the New York Film Festival. But most of us don't have that luxury. We're not on, big paychecks from Jay Penske. So
just you wait.
So we'll see. But right now, it's kind of an exciting time where we've released now over 40 films on our Kino Marquee platform. Currently, we have the Oliver Sacks documentary, and we're about to release Martin Eden. So I'll get into more of that later, but it's very timely to be back with the New York Film Festival at this moment.
Thank you, Richard. Julie, I'm going to go to you next. Brent, I'm saving you for last because I'm going to open the conversation with a question to you. So stand by. But Julie, welcome. Hi.
Hey, Eugene. How are you? So good to see you.
Where are you logging on from? Tell us what you're up to and what you're thinking about.
I'm in swing state of Pennsylvania right now, and going between Brooklyn and here. Not too far from Brooklyn, about an hour and a half. Can't get that far from Brooklyn. And we are, just working, producing films and trying to get films into the market and trying to develop new films. So I'd say it's been very interesting working on documentaries right now because we have been shooting the entire time. We have not stopped filming on various projects, which has been really scary and really taken an enormous amount of thought and planning and extra money. So it's been pretty wonderful actually that we've been able to do it. But at some point we're just waiting for the gates to come down, or they kind of go open and you go shoot, and then we're shooting in Florida, and so things get canceled and pushed. And so it's been a balancing act. And then getting films out into the world, obviously Oliver Sacks and The Mole Agent and Thousand Cuts. So we're working on films that are being released this year as well, trying to get as much attention as possible. And then finishing a couple, which is a whole other fun thing to do post remotely.
We're going to dig into that as well. Thank you, Julie. Brent, welcome. Please introduce yourself formally. And then my first question to start with you, and then I'd ask Eric to follow on it, is how does some of what you're hearing, just represented by Ariana and Richard and Julie, how does that track with what you're hearing from your broader conversations out in the industry with other distributors, exhibitors, producers, filmmakers? What are the pressure points, but what are also the areas of opportunity that you see on the ground, and as you're talking to folks literally right now about 2021, for example? Start with Brent, introduce yourself, and then let Eric jump in too.
Well, I'm Brent Lang, and I'm an editor at Variety Magazine, and I come to you from my palatial fourth floor walk-up in Brooklyn. And I think I would definitely echo some of the optimism, and it's been very impressive to see how people have sort of evolved to meet the challenges. The New York Film Festival, Toronto, how you all have decided to sort of move forward and figured out a virtual way to have a gathering. And and also just to see the way that the whole industry kind of figured out a method that was safe to get back into production, which has been a huge accomplishment. But sort of to pivot to your question, I mean, I have to say, I think I'm a little bit more pessimistic than the group because, you know, I've spent the past few days kind of covering, and I realize this is more on the major studio end of things, but I think there's a spillover effect, the delay of Bond and several other releases, and then Cineworld and Regal's decision to at least temporarily close. And then looking ahead, just the fact that the federal government doesn't seem to be any closer on another COVID relief bill, which could potentially help these movie theaters. So, I mean, I'm looking at a future where if something doesn't happen, if someone doesn't come step into the breach, some major studios don't start releasing some big movies, and some government assistance doesn't start to get made available, you're looking at 60 to 70% of movie theaters that could go bankrupt, and you're talking about tens of thousands of jobs. And obviously, this is a very big industry, and you know, its tendrils spill out in a lot of different directions. But I mean, just the sheer human cost of this pandemic, I can't forget it. So I hope there is a better, more equitable industry on the other end of this. But from where I sit this week, you know, the general mood is one of fear.
It's a heavy statement that you just ended with there, Brent, and I'd like to pick up on that. But Eric, I want to give you a chance to talk about what you're hearing from your sector, and you and Brent are in the same corporate family, but looking at the industry from different vantage points, right? So, what are you seeing as it relates to some of the things Brent's talking about, but also, you know, from the festival and art house and specialty world? How does that track in relation to what Brent's talking about?
Well, I think the optimism is sort of baked into the nature of the independent film community, in which we're constantly talking about trying to surmount the challenge of pushing things out there that aren't necessarily, you know, market ready. There's a tremendous tragedy going on with the state of exhibition, and you can't understate how dramatic it is to see the contrast between a fall movie season driven by the festivals and a fall movie season completely vacated by studio product. I mean, Bond, Dune, all that, you know, just being pushed out of there, and the kind of experiment of Tenet being released, not going so well, really lends itself to this narrative of decline. And it's not the kind of thing where the day that we get some update on all these vaccines that could be market ready, maybe by December, you know, you can just turn the lights back on. So there is definitely a dramatic downward spiral going on that side of things. And when you talk to anybody who pays attention to these things, it's not something you can spin, nor would it be in the interest of fixing the business to spin it right now. I do think that the art houses are in a very different kind of situation because they're tailor-made to meet the needs of their own local communities. And, you know, I'm praying for the future of film at Lincoln Center and all the other kinds of institutions like it all over the world. But if you look at the big picture, there isn't one sort of one size fits all kind of solution. So you talk to some people who are very nimble about figuring out how to galvanize their communities. I've been working not only with this festival, but with various regional festivals about their plan. And one of the things that I think is kind of fascinating is this idea of taking the film festival concept to the level that it always wanted to go to become more of a platform involved in the release of a film to the world. I'm looking ahead to Sundance, which is, while still taking place in a different form, it's 7 days instead of 10. There will be, everything's going to be virtual. Seems to be full steam ahead in terms of trying to utilize its resources to be the first platform for independent film of the year. And I think it's going to be fascinating to see how that plays out. I also think that, you know, even while people see TV as being an advantageous situation right now, it takes a lot of time to do TV shows, and the kind of possibilities of going to shoot a film with, you know, a budget that means you don't have more than, say, 28 days to put it together actually ends up being sort of an asset to some degree. So I think it's going to be really fascinating to see to the extent to which the feature film kind of benefits to some degree from this new environment, even as these big Hollywood tentpoles are forced to figure out some new form that will probably be informed by the kind of prominence of the VOD market in 2021.
Thank you, Eric. So let's break this down a little bit. I'm going to go back to Richard and Ariana, and either one of you want to take this next question, and then Julie, we're going to get to production in a minute. But I want to start with both exhibition and distribution, framed by what Brent and what Eric were saying. I guess I'll ask the question this way: looking forward, how do you reconsider a business going into 2021 that can't rely on, and I'm asking the same question of my colleagues at Lincoln Center, can't rely on the safety, the security of a theatrical marketplace. Both of you have companies that have embraced digital, so help us understand how you're thinking about going into 2021 and positioning yourselves for success into next year, with theatrical being such a challenge, so insecure, and maybe not even a possibility for a good chunk of next year in a meaningful way.
No, I mean, I think it's a really good question, and obviously, it's, you know, exhibition is a big question mark, and you know, we have a theater that's in New York City that hasn't opened as well, and is a big part of our business, and it's really been, you know, devastating that the IFC Center has been closed. You know, and looking to the future, I mean, I think there's no doubt that the exhibition business is going to go through, you know, a massive change, and it's change that was already happening between breaking windows and the fact that there was an ever widening gap between art house and, you know, the big studio films, you know, the Marvel films, and kind of what has been working and playing in theaters. So that shift was already happening, and I think that we would be remiss as an industry to not recognize it and really figure out how to make it work for everybody. And I think that's really, you know, moving forward. We've been releasing films day and date for you know, 15 years, and I think that, you know, that has evolved in a lot of different ways. And I think what's helped us is really having flexibility and not being limited by a windowing or, you know, a particular output deal or an international deal. And I think that that kind of flexibility is really going to become a necessity for, you know, tailoring a film's release for what that film is, instead of trying to fit it into some kind of a box. And I think that, you know, the future is going to be much more of a community-based, curated, you know, endeavor for all of us. You know, I think that I think it's going to force us to really look at who are our audiences and how do we reach them more directly. And I do think that the fact of, you know, that's what technology can help us with in terms of really reaching our audiences in a much more direct way, and engaging them and, you know, becoming loyal audiences for future. I mean, that's where you start. That's where we'll start.
Shall I jump in? By the way, I'm happily ensconced at a beach house in Fire Island, so that's the location I'm talking from. At Kino Lorber, you know, we have always considered cinema as the essence of our business. In fact, the subtitle of under our logo, our mantra, is experience cinema. So, you know, it was with a heavy heart and a lump in our throats that we, you know, faced the pandemic and the changes. But what we've seen over the past few months is some surprising developments. You know, we always considered ourselves also as kind of the newest, oldest company in the film industry. That said, the company started 40 years ago, 10 years since I bought it. But at the same time, we've always been innovating and trying new things, and the pandemic has given us an opportunity to do that. But the short form of what we're seeing is fragmentation. We're seeing windows shattered. We're seeing release schedules shuffled. And we're trying to, through all of this, really support the independent art house theaters. When we launched Kino Marquee, the mission statement was really film anthropy, if I may coin a phrase, which was to create an opportunity for local independent art houses to be the portal through which their communities experience films, even though in their own homes, not at the cinema sites, and have a benefit of capturing the revenue from that, rather than that revenue flowing directly on a VOD platform to our friends at Netflix or Hulu or wherever. This gave the theaters a chance to reverse the Trojan horse, to basically capture some of that digital revenue that they were not participating in. And it required their overcoming of fear of digital, and many have. We've been really gratified to see how successful so many of the independent art houses have been engaging with their communities, engaging with the audiences, and messaging to get the support that they needed. That's the differentiator between the independent art houses and the theaters, the large studio theaters. We're really in a different universe than the Regals and the AMCs. I mean, there's obviously porousness between our films, and I'm hoping that once the studios unleash their blockbusters, the indie art houses don't seize the opportunity to program them just to drive crowds back to the theaters. I don't think that'll happen. I think they know that they have to support their inherent audience base. So right now, we're kind of looking at alternatives even to the virtual theatrical model that we helped basically advance with Kino Marquee. We found the fragmentation occurring once we started doing what we did back in March. Most every other distributor realized that was a good model, and they launched platforms of their own to deliver through theater portals. And then the theaters did the same. The theaters said, well, we don't really want to take the Kino Marquee platform. We'll take the films that you have, but we'll put it on our own portal. That's worked out well. We're agnostic about whether or not we capture the revenue and share it, or the theater gets it and pays us. But what's more interesting to us is that the theaters now are coming to terms with the challenges of maintaining a digital platform and a digital business. And it's a challenge that's beyond the capabilities of some of them. At the same time, we've seen our business shift somewhat, and we found entities that are not theaters that are also impacted by the pandemic coming to us and saying, well, we love the idea of having a film program. We're not a movie theater. We're a magazine. We're a newspaper. We're a community organization. And it dawned on us that we could convert the Kino Marquee into a kind of a walled garden model, where we work with various institutions, cultural institutions, publications, et cetera, and facilitize them to become theatrical purveyors, if you will, to offer the theatrical experience through portals that are not movie theaters. So we've been pioneering that recently, working with the New Republic, for example, to create a film series, just about to start working with Kickstarter, working with the Knitting Factory for music docs, and a list of many others, some of which are festivals, some of which are international organizations like German Films and Alliance Française. So we see it's a much wider world for virtual cinema now that's dependent more upon the engagement with communities, irrespective of whether it's an actual movie theater that's going to lead the eyeballs. And that's where we're seeing the market change right now for us. And we expect to release over 40 films this year in a mix of what we call virtual, theatrical, and physical. Our model is called duplex. We're rooting for the theaters. We want them to come back. And we think, but realistically, I'll have to share Brent's lack of optimism that I think it's going to be a long haul well into 21 before we see any semblance of renewal among the physical locations of the theaters we serve.
Pause to tell audience folks who are listening in, watching, to feel free to send us some questions via the chat function. So we'll get to those in just a minute. Julie, I am going to come to you about production in just a moment, kind of with a similar question, but I have to ask a follow-up to Ariana and Richard, and I do invite Eric and Brent also to jump in with any questions across the group as well. How essential is theatrical? If theatrical in our specialized art space is not back meaningfully in 2021 or until later in 2021. How is that sustainable for your businesses, or how is it sustainable if theatrical isn't the cornerstone the way it was, a year ago? If it isn't for the next 6 to 12 months, what happens?
I mean, I think it will be sustainable for certain films. I think for other films, foreign language films and really art house films that aren't necessarily VOD friendly, it's hard to say whether it's going to be sustainable or not. I think we'll really have to think about other ways in terms of how we're reaching audiences. And I think the fact that theaters, you have a connection, you have a physical connection, a visceral, in-person connection. There is that can never be replicated. This virtual world works, I think, on some levels, but I don't think it's entirely sustainable. And I don't necessarily have the answer to what that is, but I think, we've released about 15 films during this pandemic. And so, I can tell you what has worked, and we did a virtual premiere, we've done virtual PR, and a lot has, worked, and we've done Q&As and interacted with the audience all virtually, but nothing can ever replicate being in that room, watching a film and speaking in person to your fellow, cinema goers and the filmmakers. So I don't ultimately think it's sustainable, because we're social animals. We live in a social world and we need that connection, and film is that connection. So I think, we're not looking at it in the future like it's gone completely. I don't think we can. I think while I understand and share some of Brett's feelings, I think that you can't look at it like it's completely done. You have to look at it as being reimagined.
Julie,
one thing I would just say about that,
Brent,
is
Brent, go ahead.
I think that in some ways, like when you look at sort of what this new world order will be, I think it's actually helpful to look at sort of older forms of media that grappled with seismic changes and how they sort of dealt with them. And I personally sort of lived through the destruction, if you will, of the print publication business, newspapers and magazines. And what you sort of discovered in that case was that either the very, very great brands like the New York Times were able to sort of sustain themselves and endure that sort of change. So I think you'll see a Disney will get through this, a Universal will get through this, or people were able to sort of take all of the kind of carnage of the moment and evolve and in really new and interesting ways. And so that the people that actually sort of benefited from that era of digital disruption were sort of scrappier and more nimble players. So I actually think in a lot of ways, the indie film community is uniquely suited to ride this out. I'm not saying it's not going to be difficult. Companies will probably go bankrupt, productions will fall apart, but there is a sort of entrepreneurial spirit that Eric was talking about that really will benefit this particular community. And there's a tighter bond with your consumer than I think you find in kind of forms of mass entertainment.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Julie, so much of the work that you do is predicated on, if not stability, at least a reliable pipeline of distribution for the films that you're making. You said you've been in production this whole time. You also had films that were ready to go. So how do you build a business from your perspective around a marketplace or a pipeline to that marketplace, to an audience that is so disrupted, that is so in question? How are you thinking about it?
I mean, we had to pivot in a lot of places, and certainly there was a film that we had that we knew were going into production, and when we were pitching it, we just took theatrical off the table for it and went for broadcast and streamers, and that was where we got the financing for the film, just knowing that we were in such an unstable market. But I think, for us, some films work well theatrically, some films work well in other ways. So we've always been able to kind of maneuver around with our slate. And it's much more challenging now. I mean, the problem was the films that had come out that were at Sundance or that were, New York Film Festival last year, that we were trying to get into cinemas, that was the kind of crushing thing. And there was a film there's a film we're holding that we just decided, you know what, this is not a film that is tied to this moment, and it's a great film for audiences, and we're just going to hold this film until hopefully not, forever from now, but for several months, and see what we can do. So I think with every film, it's been an organic conversation that we have as the team, and trying to figure out what's going to work and what's best. And also we're holding, like, okay, our theater's going to open, and then at some point you have to make a decision and say, okay, this film will work right now and it needs to find an audience. And so we'll, hopefully we'll work with a company that can get it out to the widest audience through their relationships with, like, Marquee or with IFC, with the relationships that they have. But then we're also looking at the next platforms. So, we're looking at the streamer, like, for instance, we have a film that's coming out, it's out, it was supposed to be theatrical, it's iTunes, it's digital, but then it's going to be on a streamer, then it's going to be on PBS, and we're kind of watching these windows and just trying to figure, like, little by little, we're going to get it seen by as many people as possible, and that's always the goal. So every time it's a clean slate, generally, but then, it's also, there was that moment when the companies that were financing the films that we had, like, 3 films that were just being greenlit. And it was brutal trying to get through that, because I'm like, okay, so is our company going to exist? Are we going to get, these massive corporations to give us the money to make these films, which will mean that there's entire teams that are going to be able to survive this year? It was that kind of moment. And so, but we were really fortunate because we were able to get those commitments honored. And then as we going forward, I mean, we're actually going to work on a fiction film. It's being shot out of the country, and it's going into pre-production. We also just got a green light for that. And the kind of crazy thing is, it's all about timing. That film has a company behind it that has COVID insurance. So we have to actually move on it quickly, because that insurance is going to expire and it will not exist again. It covers pandemic. So, and that's a whole other set of complications. And right now it's really about getting the films made and then figuring out the pipeline for each one separately, because we're, that is the independent kind of ethos of, like, if you can get it made, hopefully you can get it out there. And with documentaries, we were like, oh my God, this is gonna be so easy. Like, nobody's gonna have anything. It'll be a perfect time. It's just like, there's so many documentaries that are still being made and still coming out. There was no slowdown. I asked, and I'm sure you can respond to this, I asked a festival programmer at a major festival that's coming up, are you getting the same submissions? And they're like, yeah, documentaries, we are getting the same amount of submissions. And I was like, oh, yeah. It's wild.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it's reassuring to hear you talk about all this, because I always test what the kind of popular narrative is about things happening in the industry when I have people I know who are not even remotely connected to it asking me things. And one of the things I heard back in March was like, you think there's just not going to be any movies or TV shows for a while? Like, there's just going to be a hole? And it didn't take long to figure out the answer to that was no. And things have consistently been made, and on not just on the doc and the narrative side. I mean, there's things that are in the pipeline and so forth. And by the way, Julie, I'm really excited to see that Velvet Underground documentary from Todd Haynes that I know has been sort of floating around for a while. But what's really interesting to me about that is, that's something that I'm sure would be great as a theatrical experience, much in the way I was saying before, seeing American Utopia with an audience, even when they were all in their cars and you could honk after every song number, was a great experience. But if that was available on my TV right now, I would watch it. One of the things I'm thinking about is there are movies that are just sort of ready-made for the platform release. Our friends at Sony Pictures Classics lean in hard to that, and they have these films like The Climb or Truffle Hunters, which is the New York Film Festival, like an arty documentary about truffle hunters in Italy, 90-year-old truffle hunters. is not going to be something people are automatically going to press play on, which puts, you know, some of the emphasis on the need for, you know, critics to be advocates and that kind of a thing. But also, it just, one of the things I've been thinking about is just how the stuff that doesn't have an automatic selling point breaks through the noise, because if we're assuming that a lot of these things are going to have to be discovered in non-conventional ways, you know, I appreciated when IFC sent me a bottle of wine when Sputnik came out or whatever it was. I think it was the Dave Franco movie you guys sent me a bottle of wine for. And you know, Lincoln Center sent a great gift bag with beer and a face mask and all these different kinds of things. But it is that seems to be a really big open question now, is how do you eventize something that doesn't have an obvious selling point?
Well, I think that's
I'm just
why.
throwing that out there.
No, I mean, I think that's why, you know, foreign language films and really films that need a little bit more TLC, that are really dependent on theatrical experience and word of mouth experience, they are going to be a lot more challenging to get out there. And yeah, we absolutely need critics like yourselves to champion these films. And so our job is to find out who those people are and work with them. You know, this is really going to be grassroots at you know, a different level, and making grassroots mainstream. And it's for independent film. I mean, it's really going to be a challenge. But you know, the other challenge is for companies like ourselves who acquire mostly finished films. There is going to be a point next year where there's going to be a lot less films to acquire, because we've gone through a 6 to 9 month period, or even a year, where a lot of these films couldn't really afford to shoot because of lack of COVID insurance, or, you know, or the fact that the guild rules have upped budgets. So, you know, we are looking at probably a hole in 2021 where there won't be as many films to buy. So it'll be a really good time to sell your film if you do have a finished film, because it will be, you know, a seller's market.
Do you think that that's why prices are going up so much, Ariana? I mean, when you look at like TIFF and you see movies that are getting $20 million, $30 million prices, are people spending heavily now because they're concerned that there's going to be a lack of product soon?
Absolutely. It's absolutely part of it. It's part of it for sure.
We're finding a very strong flow of international films still coming through our pipeline, and I don't see that abating. I think the international community has wrangled this pandemic much more successfully than the US, as we know, thanks to our commander-in-chief. But the fact is that there are other silver linings that we're discovering in the pandemic mode. One of the things that's interesting in this, you know, very niche boutique-y art house world that my company's in, more of an art house boutique than IFC, and I say that with great respect for IFC, but you know, we're playing films now in many, many more theaters virtually than we could ever get into physically, because the theaters now have unlimited screens. And there are innumerable examples where theaters all over the country have said, you know, we love your films, but we only have 2 or 3 screens. And after we deal with Sony Classics and A24 and Neon and maybe IFC, we don't have room for you. Now they do. And they're exposing our films, and some wonderful gems, films that, you know, we are keen to have seen and exposed. And our films are being reviewed widely by local press, local critics. The box office isn't there. The virtual rental income is half or less of what we were getting from physical, but the films are playing in 3 or 4 times as more theaters. If we had a physical release of a film that was set up in 60 or 70 theaters, 60 or 70 screens around the country, that was fairly average and good result. That same film today through our Kino Marquee platform is playing in 250 to 300 screens and doing less than half the box office of the physical, but it's being seen, and the career of that film is being embossed by the awareness that's been created that is carrying through, we're finding, through the ancillary media, through the physical media that we will still release and through VOD, TVOD. It's still not being picked up by the major SVOD services, but that's nothing new. Anyhow, so that's been an interesting experience for us, and we found great support from the international sales agents from whom we buy most of our films to really want to support what we're doing, and the prices have been much more reasonable than we've been able to negotiate in years back.
Yeah, I mean, I think to your point, Richard, the audiences still are there. They still want to see these films. They exist. It's just, in some ways, sort of how do we refocus or retrain how they're watching films, and also supporting, you know, their local communities in the same way that they were when they were going to the theaters. So it's really about reaching these same people and making sure that we don't lose them.
Maybe I'm a foolish optimist, but I think we're reaching new audiences too, because in many of these smaller art houses that have 2 or 3 screens and could not show the films, they're showing our films, and they may not be picked up by everyone, but there are people in those communities across the country that are discovering films that never been available to them before. So that's a hopeful sign, and we're trying to maximize the value of that as we move through this crazy pandemic zone that we're in.
I think also, like, once people kind of got through the glut of whatever Netflix or Hulu, whatever they were going to binge or I've been wanting to see that, it got old after a while, because, you know, you got through the key things and then you saw there's a lot of crap in there, and people started to look around in a different way, which was interesting.
Yeah,
it's an interesting, yeah. Go ahead, John. Go ahead, Ryan.
No, I was just, it's the same concept of like, you have 300 channels, but you only watch one, you know?
Yeah. Look, we've seen this. I want to layer in the festivals actually to this conversation, because some points you're bringing up are really relevant to that conversation. But just adding to the new audiences, you know, the New York Film Festival itself, I feel such a sense of relief and gratitude that we're nearing the end. And what I mean by that is that we got through it, and despite, you know, a few weather cancellations, we have another one tonight due to wind. Our audience has expanded in such dramatic ways. We were having a meeting about this today. Tens of thousands of people in nearly every state in this country and territory tuned into the New York Film Festival for the very first time. So we have tens of thousands of new relationships with audience that we've never had before. And we're thinking about what we do with that, right, going forward. That's something we've been talking about internally. But to this question of festivals, I want to layer that in.
Your mailing list?
I want to layer in this question of festivals to anyone on the panel. I have tremendous hope and optimism for my friends at Sundance and friends at Berlin, as you know, as the next big. There's a lot of other festivals coming this fall. Certainly, Hamptons is happening this weekend, and Mill Valley, a bunch of others. But how does the festival landscape play into this? Anybody who wants to take it, whether to your business or whether to the community as a whole.
Well, let me just say that the festivals have a unique opportunity, and it's custom made for festivals. It gives them a chance to become year-round film societies. Not all of the festivals have the resources and the smarts of Film at Lincoln Center, but the festivals now are discovering platforms and ways that they can continue the engagement with their audiences year-round by creating film clubs. One of the things we're doing in this walled garden approach is working with festivals to create year-round film clubs with selections of our titles and other companies' titles and such, and give them an opportunity to keep engaged and keep the revenues flowing year-round. And that's a very positive development, I think.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we've been really working to try to be in as many festivals as possible with all of the, you know, the geo-blocking that's needed, or whatever we have to conform to, because also a lot of the places that a lot of the financiers or the broadcasters, you know, have pretty strict rules, and there's certainly, as we know, some places that are not letting any films play this fall. But that's something that we've been pretty successful in battling back, because we want to continue to support the festivals, and we want those festivals to exist next year or the years after.
And I think that's a really big point, is we need these festivals to survive this this pandemic, because as distributors, not only do we acquire films out of these festivals, but you know, they are supporting our artists and our filmmakers, and you know, there are so many programs associated also with the festivals, and I think that they, you know, if you look at our system and how it's all organized, they do so much of the curation, you know, for us, and we get to see how these films play with an audience, so that as distributors, we can feel confident in how we're going to release and how we're going to market and promote a film. We absolutely need them, and I think that it's incredible how they've innovated, the last couple of months, and have worked, with distributors to get films out there and reach communities. And I actually think they will be strengthened if they can survive this piece of it. I think that the community outreach will really have, to Richard's point, given them more year-round ability to program.
The credentialing and the curation of the festivals remain key elements for us in launching our films. And even if the festival is purely virtual, in retrospect, the viewers think, well, was it real or Memorex? I don't know, but it won the golden something or other at that festival, and that goes far in terms of our ability to get the attention of that film as we release it more commercially. I was crushed that one of our favorite festivals, Telluride, just basically bagged it. We had 2 or 3 films that had been accepted, and just being accepted in Telluride is like winning a great prize. Similar to the New York Film Festival, very limited selection of highly curated, superbly selected films, and not being able to have the halo coming out of Telluride was a big disappointment. And one of our films, There Is No Evil, the Golden Bear winner by Rosilov, would have been major beneficiary of the Telluride glow, and we had to forego that. We'll make do with Golden Bear, but Telluride would have been really crucial. I hope that all the festivals stay with it. We're supporting them, and we need them, and they need us.
I live for the film festivals. I wouldn't be able to do what I do if I didn't go to them. That's where I met, I think, everybody here. It's how I got involved with IndieWire, met Eugene, and the infrastructure that they create is based on an idea. So in a kind of bigger picture sense, it seems like that idea can take many different forms. And on the practical side of things, it's been fascinating to see how various kinds of businesses scrambled to find solutions, and some of them are kind of working. I mean, I talked to Shift 72, the company that I know New York Film Festival and TIFF both used to create their platform, and it's maybe not for everyone, but the fact is that's a competitive market now to try to figure out those kinds of solutions. And some people are really trying them. Netflix seems to be sitting on the sidelines for now, but I think it's notable that Searchlight Pictures has Nomadland playing the festival circuit in whatever form it needs to take. And if that movie doesn't get to be a theatrical event film, it still benefits from festival buzz. So that is still something that exists, and whatever's going to happen next year, it seems like there's still going to be a need for it. And if there's a need for it, it's going to happen one way or another. And so, I think everybody on this panel is probably going to be doing their part to figure out exactly what kind of solutions come to the table, but there will be solutions. It's not like you just turn the light off and all of a sudden none of this stuff exists. So that's kind of what keeps me charging through all this. And, I have to say it's been a really good year at New York Film Festival. So I've watched a lot of great movies, and that's been heartening to see as well.
We're almost out of time, so I'm going to pivot to a final question, and anybody can take it in any order. But to what extent is everything we've been talking about today, this past hour, contingent upon or infected by what happens on November 3rd or in the days and weeks following November 3rd? How is all of this impacted in any direction by what happens then? In your thoughts?
In what way? Because I might have a nervous breakdown, but other.
We get out of the fetal position.
Yeah. I mean, I think film has survived for quite a long time, and regardless of what happens on November 3rd, we will survive it. I think maybe on a regulatory way, or some of those things, it might be harder. It depends. It just depends. But I think that oftentimes great turmoil creates great art, and I suspect that we're going to see a lot of amazing, thoughtful, provocative film that comes out of this period. because regardless of how you feel politically, you know, there's a lot of conversation and divisiveness, and I do think out of that always comes change and good things.
I mean, I think it's absolutely critical who wins this election, not just on a personal level, but from an economic standpoint, because if you don't have a federal government that really embraces a very heavy hand, you know, Keynesian sort of approach where they're pumping a lot of money into the ecosystem, then it's going to trickle down in all parts of the economy. So you're going to have consumers that have less expendable income, which is going to impact the amount of money that they're spending on your movies that you're producing. So, and you're going to have things like, as we talked about before, you know, the COVID relief bill, which is very much tied up in the Senate right now. And a lot of businesses that are part of the kind of entertainment ecosystem are entirely dependent on not just that relief bill, but possibly future relief bills. Because when we're looking to the future, into like a sort of a nebulous future moment when there's a widely available vaccine, you know, it's going to take a pretty long bridge to get people there. So it could not be more consequential. I think on a sort of artistic level, I mean, if Trump actually wins, perhaps art is even more important than ever, because we'll be turning to it to sort of make sense of all this madness.
I'd like to add a comment that, you know, we've all been now for these 4 years at least, the loyal opposition, loyal in question, in quotes, but the fact is that, you know, we've been waging, all of us in our own ways have been waging a guerrilla war against the current administration. In a guerrilla war, as you know, if you don't lose, you win. And we've been stalwart, and we've been making progress and changing minds and changing consciousness of the kinds of films that we've been putting forward to audiences. It'll be a bit of a upside down world if we're suddenly in power. It'll be strange to suddenly have the wind at our back, but I don't think we can give up the fight, because there are many challenges still ahead in terms of racial justice and human rights and all these things that won't be solved simply by Biden and Harris getting elected. I love the unique developments that occurred recently when the gay community hijacked the Proud Boys site. And we were thrilled because we happened to have a wonderful French short miniseries called Proud, which we immediately promoted on the sites that were being hijacked.
Love that. That's amazing.
These are kind of the guerrilla tactics that we have to keep pursuing and make successful, even if we're the party in power, which I hope we will be.
Yeah, our film Death of Stalin has been rising the iTunes charts. Just want to say. No, I agree completely. I agree with both Brett and Richard, and I do think that regardless, you know, it will be different. I think no matter who wins, it doesn't matter who wins, we are looking at a different business anyway in 2021.
But also, more importantly, there needs to be a landslide, because if there's not, we're going to be thrown into this chaos of election fraud and bullshit that, you know, is going to take over and be really difficult to get anything done for quite a while. Landslide.
Vote. Everybody vote. Or tell your friends.
I want to thank everyone: Ariana Bacco, Brent Lang, Julie Goldman, Eric Kohn, and Richard Lorber for wrapping up this talk series with us. I want to thank our friends and supporters from Topic, and thank everyone who's participated in our industry events, our screenings, our conversations, and just have been supportive of the festival this year. We're so thankful to the films, the filmmakers, and the distributors who stuck with us this year. I know it was tough decisions that we had to make at times about how to make the festival happen, and it wouldn't have happened without everyone who got involved at such an elemental, fundamental level. And you know, there's even films that we had to bid farewell to until next year, and so next year does look bright for some films that couldn't make it to the festival this year. So we're excited about that too. Again, thank you, Maria. Thank you. I see you back on screen. Thank you for supporting and jumping in this year to make this happen. You're muted.
Thank you, Maria.
You're muted.
You're muted, Maria.
Well, thank you everybody for tuning in. And there's a few days left of the festival in drive-ins, and then you'll be able to continue watching films on our virtual platform until Friday the 16th, and then we'll pivot to, I think, one of our first new releases is Martin Eden with Kino, Lorber, and some retrospectives and other things happening into the fall. But again, thank you very much for the conversation today, and we'll hope to see you soon.
Thank you.
Take care.
Good to see you all.